Welcome back to Click Revision's Romeo and Juliet season. Now we've looked at the context in which Shakespeare wrote the play, we're going to look at each of the characters in turn, beginning with the two title characters. This video is the first of two, examining the character of Romeo. We'll take a look at what sort of person he is, his journey throughout the play's narrative, and how he acts towards everyone around him. So, Romeo Montague. Depending on how you look at it, he's either literature's greatest romantic hero, or an overly emotional misery guts who lures an innocent young girl to her doom. But we'll come back to that later. To begin with, let's have a look at who Romeo is at the start of the play, and begin to plot his journey from there. Romeo is the son of Lord and Lady Montague, a rich, noble family who live in the city of Verona in northern Italy. The first lines of the play's prologue tell us that the Montagues have for a long time been enemies with the Capulet family, another rich aristocratic family based in the same city. Two households both alike in dignity in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Here, alike in dignity means both families are equally wealthy, while ancient grudge tells us that the Montagues and the Capulets have hated each other for a very long time. So, he's a rich kid, rich enough to have his own manservant, Balthazar, and he doesn't seem to have much direction in life, so that he and most of his friends and family spend their time beefing with the Capulets and generally making a nuisance of themselves around town. Physically, Romeo is very attractive and charming, which explains why Juliet falls for him. She describes him as beautiful, while the nurse alludes to him being handsome. Yet he is quite immature when the play begins, and matures throughout the few days over which the play takes place. Even still, he has a good reputation around Verona, and even Lord Capulet describes him as having a reputation throughout Verona as a virtuous and well-behaved young man. At the beginning of the play, Romeo is depressed, because he's in love with a girl called Rosaline, but this love is unrequited, which means she does not love him back. His friend Mercutio describes him as shot through the ear with a love song, the very pin of his heart cleft with the blind bow-boy's butt shaft. It's as good a place to start as any with the character of Romeo, because the phrase butt shaft sounds a bit rude and is something most students will have a laugh at and remember later on. But what Mercutio means here is that Romeo's heart has been pierced by Cupid's arrow. In Roman myth, Cupid was the god of love and desire who shot an arrow into the hearts of people to make them fall in love. Even if you've never heard of the character, you'll recognise Cupid, as in modern culture he's most commonly represented as a flying baby with a bow and arrow. This sense of power and control links greatly to the theme of fate that runs through Romeo and Juliet, which we will discuss in much greater detail in a later video. In any case, at the start of the play, Romeo is lost in love for Rosaline, and miserable because she isn't showing any interest in him. Benvolio tells Romeo's parents he saw Romeo out walking, and that he's been hiding in the woods to get away from everyone and feel sorry for himself. This is confirmed by Lord Montague, who says, "Many a morning hath he there been seen, with tears augmenting the fresh morning dew," meaning he goes there all the time to cry, and when he comes home he locks himself in his room, closes all the blinds and hides away in the darkness. Now, this doesn't give a very heroic first impression of Romeo to the audience. Remember, at this stage, the audience hasn't even seen him yet. They're just told that he's crying over a girl like some sort of whiner. But what's important to take away here is the idea of Romeo being a sensitive, romantic young man, because if he wasn't, he certainly wouldn't be dragged along by fate the way he is. In any case, when Romeo enters, Rosaline is all he can talk about, and how she doesn't love him. He describes love as a madness most discreet, suggesting that he feels he's not in control of his emotions, and is therefore at the mercy of his heartache. There is nothing he can do about it, and it is completely eating him up inside. To Romeo, love is a curse. Too rude, too boisterous, and it pricks like thorn. So clearly he's really torn up by Rosaline not loving him. Now, we never meet Rosaline in the play, so we don't know exactly what she dislikes about Romeo. However, she is very important, because she's a member of the Capulet family, and Romeo and his friends sneak into the Capulet party so that Romeo might catch a glimpse of Rosaline. They manage to gatecrash the party because the servant who has the guest list is illiterate and can't read it, and they wear masks so they will not be recognised by the Capulets. At this point, the prince of the city has already told both families that they will be executed if they fight anymore. So Romeo is taking a huge risk by going to the party. If he's found to be inciting the Capulets, he will be killed for his trouble. He clearly wants to see Rosaline a huge amount, which is ironic, because as soon as he lays eyes on Juliet, he completely forgets that Rosaline ever existed, and denies on the spot that he has ever felt love before. He says, "Did my heart love till now? Forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night." This is an extremely fickle response, but it should highlight just how beautiful Juliet is in Romeo's eyes. Don't forget that she would have been played by a boy in Shakespeare's time, so it was important to overplay the descriptions of her beauty so the audience could accept it. Anyway, Romeo and Juliet have met now, and Rosaline is out of the picture and won't be mentioned again. Romeo takes Juliet's hand, and the two exchange 14 lines of dialogue before their first kiss. These 14 lines constitute a shared sonnet, a love poem split between the two characters, and we can see the division of the lines and the rhyme scheme very much conforms to the standard sonnet template here. Both Romeo and Juliet use the same rhyming words, this and kiss, in their dialogue, which reinforces how attuned to one another they are. It is essentially love at first sight, fate controlling the destinies of these two youngsters, and Romeo almost certainly forgets himself, because after they've kissed and Juliet gets whisked away by her nurse, he seems surprised to discover that she's a Capulet, despite the fact he's snuck into the Capulets' party. He also realises that he's condemned himself to death, but this doesn't deter him from seeing Juliet again. As the sun rises, Romeo's friends all think he's gone back to the woods to mope over Rosaline, but he goes to see Juliet instead. This is Act 2, Scene 2, the famous balcony scene. Here, Romeo once again puts his life at risk by entering the Capulets' property by climbing over a wall. Romeo watches Juliet's bedroom window, desperate for a glimpse of her, and when she appears, he likens her appearance to the sun rising. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. And he continues to watch her talking to herself, but he's unable to hear her. He wants to believe that she's talking to him, but knows this can't be the case because she doesn't know he's there. Instead, he comments on her beauty, and commentates on her actions. Here, Romeo says that Juliet's eyes are brighter than the two brightest stars in the sky, and they shine with enough light to convince the birds that it's daytime. He also says he wishes he could be her glove, because she's resting her chin on her hand while leaning on the balcony. He also calls her an angel, exclaiming, "Oh, speak again, bright angel." So clearly Romeo's language is really exaggerated and melodramatic here, just as it was towards Rosaline the day before. He is completely head over heels for Juliet. When Juliet does speak, it is not to Romeo, but rather as an exclamation of grief. "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not, be but sworn, my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet." This is one of the most famous bits of dialogue in the play, and Juliet is basically saying, of all the people I could have fallen in love with, why did it have to be a Montague? She suggests that Romeo could forsake his family and change his name, or that she could do the same, so that they might be together. Romeo would pretty much agree to anything to be with Juliet at this point, so of course he thinks it's a great idea. "Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth I never will be Romeo," he says. At this point, Juliet notices the stranger lurking in her garden, and Romeo reveals himself. She asks, "Is that Romeo? And is it true you're a Montague?" And Romeo plays along, and replies, "Neither, fair maid, if either thee dislike," meaning, "I'll be someone else if you want me to be." He says that he's flown over the high orchard wall on the wings of love, and when Juliet warns him he will be killed by the guards if they find him on the property, he tells her that if she doesn't love him, he would rather welcome death than continue to live without her love. Romeo swears he loves Juliet, and she tells him her love is as deep as the sea and never-ending. At this point, Juliet's nurse enters the room, so she has to leave, but her parting message to Romeo is that she will marry him if he sends her a message the next day telling her where and when. She says, "If that thy bent of love be honourable, thy purpose marriage send me word tomorrow, by one that I'll procure to come to thee, where and what time thou wilt perform the rite." He agrees, and they exchange more soppy, over-the-top messages of love, and he leaves, still pining for Juliet as he goes. What's important here is that both Romeo and Juliet have forsaken their families and their personal safety in order to arrange to get married. Already, Romeo is showing himself to be less weedy and selfish than the opening of the play would suggest. So Romeo goes to visit Friar Lawrence, his local priest, who he already knows well and who's been guiding him through his painful, unrequited love for Rosaline. Romeo tells the friar about his new love for Juliet, and begs him to marry them that very day. He says, "Then plainly know my heart's dear love is set on the fair daughter of rich Capulet. As mine on hers, so hers is set on mine, and all combined save what thou must combine by holy marriage. When and where and how we met, we wooed, and made exchange of vow, I'll tell thee as we pass, but this I pray, that thou consent to marry us today. Friar Lawrence is surprised by Romeo's sudden change of heart, and thinks he is fickle and superficial, telling him that young men love with their eyes and not their hearts, as though any pretty girl could turn their heads and make them believe that they were in love. Romeo's response here is basically, give me a break, Rosaline didn't love me back, but Juliet does. I pray thee, chide not. Her I love now doth grace for grace and love for love allow. The other did not so. And though Friar Lawrence isn't convinced by this, calling Romeo a young waverer, he agrees to marry them anyway, because their union might have a hope of bringing the families together after so many years of enmity. Romeo's next move is to visit his friends, Mercutio and Benvolio, and he's in a good mood, because together they all make a lot of crude sex jokes regarding where Romeo might have disappeared to the night before when he gave them the slip. Jokes like Romeo saying, "Why, then is my pump well flowered." Meanwhile, Mercutio is also happy, because he can see Romeo is happy, and himself again. He says, "Now art thou Romeo, now art thou what thou art, by art as well as by nature, for this drivelling love is like a great natural that runs lolling up and down to hide his bauble in a hole," which means exactly what you think it does. Nonetheless, it's fair to say that Romeo is at his happiest at this point. Before Juliet's nurse comes to see him, the whole of Act 2, Scene 4 is basically one long, smug play on words between him and Mercutio as they banter. It's basically several pages of smutty innuendo, and not what most people expect from Shakespeare at all. But it's very important, because this part of the play shows how Romeo isn't just a whinging, crying weakling, but that he's popular, and on a social level he's very much a normal teenager. However, when the nurse does enter, Romeo shows he is maturing by acting responsibly towards her, whereas Mercutio is incredibly rude to the poor woman, insulting her in a way that embarrasses Romeo so much that he feels the need to apologise on Mercutio's behalf. In fact, Romeo even insists that the nurse take some payment for her efforts to bring the two together, in the same way a more mature person might think to tip a waiter at a restaurant. So thanks to the friar and the nurse, Romeo and Juliet are married. At this point, Romeo is so confident in the happiness he feels that he challenges fate to ruin it for him, saying, "Love devouring death do what he dare," which, considering what we already know will come of the pair of them, is probably an arrogant and a foolish thing to say in the church while your wedding is taking place. Appropriately, this point at the end of Act 2 and the beginning of Act 3 is also where everything begins to go wrong for both of them, and you could argue that it all goes wrong directly because of Romeo. That's it for part 1. Thanks for watching. Our next video will continue examining Romeo's progression throughout the play, and focus on the downslide to his inevitable death. But before you move on, we'd recommend you try to answer these 3 revision questions to the best of your ability. Question 1. How would you describe Romeo at the start of the play? Choose 5 words or phrases and write a few sentences detailing why you think each is appropriate. Question 2. What actions does Romeo take that are brave or heroic in the first part of the play? Try to answer in full sentences. Question 3. To what extent is Romeo in control of his destiny in the first half of the play? Try to refer to specific moments from the text in your answer.